Welcome back to our look at 50 horror classics. And now we're getting into the really old, semi-modern setups. We start with the tale of Bluebeard. John Carradine, one of the ancestors of the Carradine brothers, who are famous for stuff like Revenge of the Nerds, Kung Fu The Legend Continues, and Wild West Tech. Well, this Carradine plays Gaston, a puppeteer who specializes in marionettes, and very elaborate plays done by the marionettes, namely Faust, and who also moonlights as an artist. He sells his paintings to this art dealer, who then in turn flips them for a tidy profit. Unfortunately, Gaston has a dark secret. Every time he paints a woman, he's compelled to strangle her with his tie. A very specific type of tie that's found nowhere else. Anyway, he meets up with Mary and Giselle. This story takes place in Paris, using beautiful matte paintings to depict the scenery. Anyway, he meets sisters Giselle and Marie. Now, he takes a shine to Marie, and Giselle, on orders from the police, asks that she paint his portrait, or he paint her portrait, excuse me. Now, she's posing as a foreign tourist who's going back to her home country with her dad quickly, so hopefully his mad urge won't be satiated. Unfortunately, this elaborate trap that the police have set, involving all of them, and having been catalyzed by the coercion of the art dealer, who decided to flip the painting of a previously killed woman too soon, that fails when the guy posing as the dad is killed by the art dealer, and the the secrecy that Gaston uses to paint his models is exposed, and ultimately poor Giselle is killed. Eventually, he reveals to Marie that they once found an injured but alive woman in the river and brought her to his place because it was the closest one. And while she was recuperating, he looked on her visage and saw a vision of Joan of Arc. This was back when he was literally a starving artist in school. And when he painted her portrait as Joan of Arc, he got an award and accolades and all sorts of good stuff. But when he met her in person after she'd recovered, it was revealed that she was a lady of the evening and very cynical and callous. She laughed at him when he poured his heart out to her. And in a fit of mad rage, he strangled her. And from then on, whenever he paints a woman, he sees her laughing at him. Eventually, the police catch up, and he manages to fend them off on Paris's rooftops when he gets too cocky, and gravity itself does him in. He slips on a loose brick near one of the rooftop edges and falls into the river, never to be seen again. Thankfully, Marie is safe. Our next story involves a type of pseudo-vampirism and Bela Lugosi not playing Dracula, but still sleeping in a coffin. It seems a rash of bride deaths have occurred, and the bodies have been mysteriously vanishing. Literally, as a woman says "I do" in the opening act of the film, she drops dead. And the people who come to take the body to the mortuary, they're not actually morticians. It's revealed that Lugosi, who's been disbarred from practicing medicine, is keeping his elderly wife alive and young through gland secretions he steals from brides. He slips them drugged flour, and he keeps them for their fluids in his house. And these fluids help keep his wife from aging. But it's like a drug. The more she has, the more she needs. And he's also got a host of misshapen servants, an elderly woman and her 2 sons, a hunchback who can't speak, and a guy with dwarfism who is kind of a little weasel, but I found him entertaining. And eventually, when this reporter tries to expose what happened, or what's been happening, after she discovers the flour that Lugosi's character has been using to drug the women, and traces it to his place, she even spends the night in his house and discovers what's been going on, but thanks to a combination of hypnosis and gaslighting, she's convinced briefly that nothing happened. Meanwhile, Lugosi, who's been fed up with the hunchback servant's obsession with women's hair and keeps bothering the ladies, in a fit of rage, Lugosi strangles the poor guy. Eventually, they try to set a trap to catch Lugosi in the act with the help of a struggling actress friend of the reporter. Unfortunately, he's onto the scam and kidnaps the reporter. And he tries to harvest fluids from her to keep the wife going. Meanwhile, when the police give chase, the guy with dwarfism is shot fatally, and Lugosi callously leaves him behind. But before the reporter can be harvested at the house, the mother of the 2 guys, finally fed up with the mistreatment of her family by Lugosi, stabs him and is strangled for her trouble. And just before she dies, she also manages to stab the wife before she can try to harvest the fluids herself. And so they all die, except for the brides who were kept alive in comas in the crypt beneath the house, and the reporter, and a doctor associate who crops up periodically in the film, who took a shine to the reporter lady while they worked together to uncover the plot. The film ends on a joke with the smarmy photographer who works with the reporter sniffing one of the drugged flowers and passing out. Next is the granddaddy of all modern zombie flicks. After White Zombie and similar films, there was The Night of the Living Dead. George A. Romero's first and best work. He and his buddies shot this for very little money around the time that Martin Luther King was assassinated. And so, having happened to cast a black guy as the lead caused a bit of a stir by sheer accident. And funny story, when he finished filming, he literally threw the film in the back of a car and drove to the theater to air it. Well, after filming and editing, of course. But anyway, on to the story. It starts with siblings Barbara and Johnny going to their dad's grave to place a wreath at their mom's behest. And they could have avoided what happened to them if they had just lied to her. Oh well. Now, it seems that it takes place in the summer, right around daylight savings time, because at 8 o'clock, it's still daylight. And yet they haven't had to change the clocks yet. Furthermore, there's some unusual lightning in the sky that Johnny notices, but Barbara doesn't, and also radio interference. Now, it's revealed that Barbara finds this cemetery a little bit creepy, especially when they were kids. Johnny scared her with a jump scare, and she's still spooked by the place. So Johnny teases her with the iconic line, "They're coming to get you, Barbara." Only for someone to stumble into the cemetery, and it's revealed this guy is the first zombie we see on screen. And he goes after Barbara. Johnny tries to fight him off, only to get his head knocked against a tombstone with fatal consequences. Barbara is forced to flee to the car, lock herself in, and when the creature breaks one of the windows to get in, she has to pull the parking brake and try to coast away, which she does at first until she gets stuck against a tree. So she has to hoof it to the nearest shelter, an old farmhouse, and when she manages to get inside, before she can call for help, the creature knocks into the phone line, cutting it off. So Barbara explores the house, finds a trophy room, indicating the possibility that the owner might also own a gun. Because you don't have trophies in a room unless you shot them yourself. Unfortunately, she finds the lady of the house dead. And this spooks her, so she tries to make a break for it, only to realize that there were more creatures surrounding the place. But luckily, a guy shows up, Ben, who quickly gets her back into the house, locks the door, and introduces himself. Tries to ask her questions, but she's catatonic at this point. And after the zombies smash the headlights of the car, Ben decides to take a couple of them out with a tire iron. And he's pretty successful. He even manages to push one outside the house when it tries to get in, and eventually lights it on fire to keep the creatures at bay, because they don't seem to like fire. At this point, he decides that they should probably board up the doors and windows to try to keep the creatures out. And so we find out where he came from. He witnessed a fire truck covered in those creatures plow into a gas station and catch fire. And he tries to go to a diner that's nearby, but it's surrounded, and there's no one living left in there. So, after borrowing that truck that he arrived in, he plows through a whole mess of them, only to find that while they react to fire, they don't react to being run over. And then he ended up at the house. Unfortunately, when Barbara tells her story, he's a little annoyed that she's kind of out of it. But then she gets affronted when she suggests that they go look for her brother when it's obvious that he's done for. And finding a bit of her spine, she manages to slap Ben for insinuating that her brother's dead. Only he gives it right back to her, and that knocks her out, because she's been stressed beyond the point of sanity. This leaves Ben free to board up all the windows and doors, and at least try to get things secure. He even turns on the radio to try and get some information. And then, when he goes to deal with the remains of the owner of the house upstairs, we meet the rest of the denizens of the house, or at least the ones who took shelter here. There's Tom and Judy, a young couple who are going to go skinny dipping at the local pond. The Coopers, Mr. Cooper, not to be confused with the one played by Mark Curry. He's a bit of a headstrong jerk who thinks he's got to be right all the time and insists that the basement's the safest spot to hide, not realizing that it's a dead end. And if you got no fallback point, you got no chance. And he's only out for himself and his family. Yeah, he's the jerk of the movie. Mrs. Cooper, she quietly loathes him, and she's a bit nicer. Way too good for that jerk. And we also meet their daughter, who unfortunately was injured earlier. When their car was turned over, she got tagged by one of the creatures and is not doing so hot. And Ben and Mr. Cooper butt heads constantly, with Ben insisting that he's in charge because at the very least he's trying to do something. While Cooper, he's an opportunistic coward. Eventually, they find a TV and get some more information on what's going on. It seems that radiation from a satellite that orbited Venus and came back to Earth has bombarded the Earth, and it's causing the recently dead to come back as cannibalistic horrors. And the only way to take them out is to shoot them in the head. We see some of these creatures shrug off bullets to the chest, but not to the head. So that's confirmed. We also find out that kill squads have been formed to take these creatures out, and they're doing a pretty good job. Unfortunately, the TV news people, give information that seals the fate of our band of survivors. They're told to go to a town not far from the farmhouse, where people are congregating to get proper aid. And so they form a plan to refuel the car from a pump nearby, and use Molotov cocktails to fend off the ghouls. And yes, they're called ghouls in this film. And once the car is refueled, they plan to pile in and get the duck out of Fudge. Unfortunately, things don't go very well. The key that's said to be for the pump doesn't work, so Ben has to shoot the lock off the pump. Tom fumbles the gas pump, spilling gas everywhere, including on top of the torch that they brought with them, which sets the car on fire. And Tom and Judy both die when the car explodes after they got it away from the pump, because Judy's jacket got caught inside the cabin of the vehicle. If she'd stayed behind, maybe none of them would have died. The car would have exploded, but they would have lived. Ben makes it back to the house, only for Cooper not to let him in. So Ben has to bust down the door, and then when they get things barricaded back, having had enough of Ben, he knocks him around a bit, threatens to feed him to the creatures, and we're back to square one. And this is when things get really gory. We've seen a couple of dead ghouls, but this time we see what the ghouls can do. They take the cooked to perfection Judy and Tom, and we see the zombies eat people for the first time. Not just brains, but all bits. And it is really gruesome. I mean, the original story was in black and white. I've been watching this stuff on YouTube rather than the DVDs, because the discs are not the best quality. But anyway, I was watching this in color, and I've seen the original in black and white, and both ways it is pretty gruesome, especially for the 60s. Eventually, Barbara, who's starting to come around, mentions that she has a car, but it's got no keys. But before anyone can make plans to get to the car and maybe hotwire it, the ghouls end up knocking down the power lines, plunging the house into darkness. And since the fires have died down, the house is now ripe for the picking. The ghouls make their move and start attacking every opening available. And the pile of wood that Ben valiantly tried to put together to defend the place, turns out there are too many to stop with the barricade. If only they'd gone to the second floor and destroyed the stairs, then maybe they could have survived longer. Mrs. Cooper, Ben, and eventually Barbara all try to keep the zombies at bay using whatever barricades they can. Ben drops the gun that was located earlier, and Cooper manages to get it and starts threatening people. But Ben manages to wrestle the gun back and shoot Cooper in the guts. He stumbles downstairs to see his daughter one last time. Meanwhile, Barbara, who, after seeing Mrs. Cooper threatened by the zombies, tries to help, but eventually the barricade fails, and her own zombified brother, Johnny, pulls her into the crowd to presumably be torn apart. We don't see it happen, but we know it happened. Meanwhile, Mrs. Cooper went downstairs to see what happened to her husband and finds her zombified daughter taking bites out of her dad. And poor Mrs. Cooper freezes up and allows herself to be stabbed to death by her daughter wielding a trowel. Eventually, Ben's forced to, ironically, take shelter in the basement, which, as it turns out, was actually really well barricaded, so maybe they wouldn't have gotten through. He deals with the Coopers as they wake up, but the daughter is left outside with the rest of the horde as they go in and start trying to get inside the basement. Eventually morning dawns, and the kill squad has been doing a very good job. They even make it to the house, find the aftermath of the failed escape attempt, take out a few of the zombies that have been in the house. We don't see what happens to the youngest Cooper, but it's presumed that she gets taken out too. Ben, having barely managed to sleep through the night, manages to make it upstairs and see outside the window, only to be mistaken for a zombie and shot by one of the squad members. And that ends our tale. His body is dragged out and burned, and the kill squad resumes their hunt, completely unaware that they just killed a hero. Like I said, it was very poignant at the time. Yeah, George Romero didn't realize it, but he was kicking off a whole franchise that reinvented the zombie genre. And it wouldn't be until Return of the Living Dead that the zombie mythos gets upended like that again. So, good for him. Our next film is Boris Karloff's last outing as Detective Wong, thankfully, because while Karloff is good, the portrayal of a Asian fella by a white fella is still not very kosher. This time, Wong and his associates, the white detective and the reporter lady, whose name I find out is Bobby, are on the case of a murder of a guy who owns an ocean liner that had recently caught fire and exploded, killing a lot of innocent people. But just before he was murdered, he gets into an argument with the son of his business rival, who wants to marry the guy's daughter. The son is the prime suspect for quite a while until some evidence surfaces. A document that the daughter's chauffeur burned, and possible connections to smuggled Chinese bonds. Usually what is bought after stocks are sold. And another murder of a Chinese servant who was leading a double life. Eventually it's revealed that, yeah, the guy was smuggling stuff, and it was the chauffeur who killed the old man, and had nearly killed the father of the business rival, who was in on it, along with a lawyer friend who everyone thought they could trust. And the film ends with a joke that was set up earlier. Bobby and the white detective have a sort of love-hate relationship, and she mentions getting him to eat his hat because he was wrong about something. And the film ends with Wong and Bobby seasoning the hat for the guy to eat, but he doesn't. And it's a fairly lighthearted tale. Pretty decent action too. There's a car chase, shootouts, and they add some legitimacy to the film by casting actual Asian actors for a meetup for information gathering by Wong. And there's intrigue with the fact that with the fact that the old man changed his will just before he died so that his daughter gets everything. And you don't quite know what's going on until the very end. And I'm not one for detective stories, but this one was pretty good. If they ever remake this series of murder mysteries, all I gotta do is cast an actual Asian actor to portray Wong, and they might be good to go. They could easily update this series for the modern day, especially with programs like CSI and NCIS being so popular. Anyway, that ends this block of our horror classics. And when next we meet, Lon Chaney and his son show their chops, and we are introduced to the granddaddy of all modern film vampires. Stay tuned as we go back to the old world and the silent film era.